Hello, you're watching I-24 News. I'm David Matlin, live in Tel Aviv. You're watching Middle East Now. Before we get started, here are the headlines. Reports and online footage reveal fresh IDF activity, expanding outward from the so-called buffer zone along the border with Syria as Israel works to secure the immediate disputed territory. Turkey appears to be making major preparations for an assault on Kurdish-held areas of northern Syria, seen by Turkey as a threat, while the Kurds as a chance for long-sought regional autonomy and self-rule. And Israelis hold their breath as the potential for a long-awaited hostage deal with what remains of Hamas and other Gazan factions appears to grow. We'll have the updates. Now, our attention turns first to the tense, definitely unpredictable situation in Syria, and reports now of additional Israel Defense Force activity in the border region. Variety of online footage and reports you're seeing here emerged in Syria showing IDF troops making forays into some small Syrian towns along the border with the Israeli Golan Heights. This is outside the so-called buffer zone, that remnant of the ceasefire with the Assad regime from the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Now, Israeli tanks and soldiers can be seen interacting peacefully with locals as effort appears ongoing to ensure no hostile groups entrench, at least near the border. But that's where we go now, up to the border area where our correspondent Emmanuel Honorat is standing by there covering events of the day. Emmanuel, obviously we're talking about these IDF reports of IDF activity now. They appear defensive in nature. Look, any unrest or clashes? What can you tell us about what's going on in the area?
There haven't been any clashes. In fact, everything here seems pretty calm. But the new Syrian leader, al-Jolani, did say that he wants Israel to leave the buffer zone and that the new Syrian leadership is committed to the 1974 ceasefire agreement. But interestingly, he also did say that Syria will not become a new launch pad for attacks on Israel. Now, that's quite a break from what we saw with the previous government, with the regime under Bashar al-Assad, which had a very close relationship, a close alliance with Hezbollah, which, as we know, was launching attacks not only from Lebanon, but also from Syria. And this really could perhaps be marking some kind of a turning point. But in the meantime, earlier today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was on the Syrian side of the Hermon, saying that the IDF and Israel will remain in those positions until it deems necessary. So we are still seeing quite a few developments on that front, but at this stage, it's still very much too early to tell how all of this will develop. I do actually want to bring up something else. Around 9 days ago, when Bashar al-Assad fell, within hours, there was the new flag of Syria, the Syrian flag, which instead of having 2 stars now has 3 stars on the top of this statue right here in one of the main squares of Majd al-Shams, and right behind it is a municipality. But as of now, the flag has already been removed, and we spoke to locals about it, and no one really seemed to say too much about it. Most locals here did express their happiness with the fall of Assad, and many of them also showing their support for Israel. So again, a very mixed bag here in Majd al-Shams as well. Different opinions, different views, but so far life is as normal here. Just a lot going on across the border, and everyone is looking towards that border to see how things might be developing.
Certainly a very complex part of Israel here, often hard to get candid opinions with a camera and microphone in these areas, very along the border. Thank you, Emmanuel Honorat, for bringing us some of the latest up there. Now, we are joined in the studio by Dan Perry, international affairs analyst. Dan, good to have you back with us. Looking at Syria right now and focusing first on the IDF side of things, a lot of fuss from certain corners on just what the IDF has been doing along the border, whether it be seizing a strip of territory here in the buffer zone. It really does all appear defensive or precautionary at this point. Do you agree that this is somewhat, so far, appearing to be the sensible activity of Israel in a border facing the collapse of the state next door?
Yeah, especially given that there was not unreasonable fear that the new government could be aggressive, given that they have ties to al-Qaeda. So, sure. On the other hand, when's the last time in history you heard of another country destroying the entire military, practically, of a different country without a war, right? I mean, it was on the edge. It's true that the rest of the region, doesn't have much case against Israel taking that buffer zone. But of course, Israel's reputation when it comes to occupying territories temporarily is pretty bad. What with, 57 years and 67 years in the West Bank. Yeah. So, yeah, I understand the fears of the world. On the other hand, Israel has a case. And they haven't been too piggish about it. It's really only the area right next to the border and the incredibly high territory of the Syrian Oman. And they've made clear it's temporary, although maybe not that temporary.
Israel had a lot of success during some of the peaks of the civil war there with this Operation Good Neighbor, where the IDF set up camps along the border here for humanitarian aid, for medical treatment. I feel, do you agree that it should be the time for Israel perhaps to extend a hand in peace, to be broadcasting louder that this is what we'd like to see out of this region, is a peaceful resolution? Should that be a wider
in fairness, Netanyahu did make that statement, but yeah, should it have been louder? I think so. Should they have been even more clear about why they're doing what they're doing with taking out much of the army and the Navy and everything else? Chemical sites is eminently defensible. At the end of the day, this attaches to the reason why much of the world, at least for the first week, wasn't really celebrating the fall of a terrible, despotic butcher of a dictator, because they're wondering, could this be worse if they really are Islamist? You can be cynical and say that is why Ahmed Ashara, also known as Jolani, the new leader in Syria, has been making such peaceable-sounding noises. I mean, from the sound of it, he is far less aggressive towards Israel, and certainly far more democratic in terms of Syria domestic policy than what preceded, by far.
Kind of astounding,
now,
actually.
Can we believe that? HTS is a little bit weak in southern Syria. They will probably need a coalition with secular forces, with non-Sunni Islamists, and so maybe he has to make these noises. On the other hand, when he was a jihadi, he was a very young man. And who amongst us has not done foolish things as a young man?
He's grown, certainly. Yeah. An intriguing character. We'll get into more of his latest in a moment. But this precarious situation along the Israeli-Syrian border is certainly holding our attention, as the collapse of the Assad regime has thrown the Golan Heights region into uncertainty at best, with the potential for real turmoil and conflict, as we just discussed. Now, some leading Syrian groups are demanding an Israeli withdrawal from this newly acquired defensive border position, but Israel has been signaling so far no end yet to its presence in this disputed territory. Our Alex Schloss reports.
A week after the fall of Syria's Assad regime and the IDF incursion into the demilitarized zone on the Syrian side of the border, dividing the Israeli-annexed Golan Heights from Syria proper, Syrians are pleading with their new government to secure an Israeli withdrawal from the area. Though Israel says its presence in the buffer zone is temporary, aimed at deterring armed factions from threatening Israeli communities, villagers are concerned that the IDF's presence may become indefinite.
This is the border with Israel on the other side. The only reason we are here is to make sure that we are protecting our civilians on the other side of the border.
The IDF is in regular contact with Syrian Druze community leaders, and they have even cooperated with Israeli forces on efforts to collect abandoned Syrian army weaponry. Meanwhile, the Israeli government has approved plans to expand settlements in the Golan Heights. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that the move was necessary because a new front had opened on Israel's border with Syria following the fall of the Assad regime to an Islamist-led rebel alliance. The plan aims to double the population of the Golan Heights and has been met with harsh international criticism, citing the fact that the Golan region is considered occupied Syrian territory, with only the U.S. recognizing Israel's annexation of the region in 2019. The Golan Heights has been under Israeli control since the 1967 Six-Day War, during which Syria used the territory to shell Israeli villages.
And regarding this Israeli occupation, it is not surprising since Israel occupied Palestine and Sinai and occupied the Syrian Golan Heights and Lebanon, it is currently starting a new occupation. Behind us, you can see the digging which the Israeli army is doing, which is against all international charters.
Currently, there are around 30 Israeli villages in the Golan Heights, home to an estimated 20,000 Israelis. They live alongside some 20,000 Druze Arabs, most of whom do not possess Israeli citizenship and still consider themselves Syrian, though there is a disparity between the older and younger generations. This contrasts sharply with the Israeli Druze communities in northern Israel, who are citizens of Israel and the only Arab community conscripted into the IDF.
Now, the leader of the currently dominant Islamist group in Syria, al-Jolani, now going by his real name, al-Shara, says that a quote-unquote social contract between the state and all religions in the country is needed to ensure what he termed social justice. Now, it's actually a groundbreaking statement for a jihadist leader in the region, and one especially important as he strives for maintaining, as he puts it, a united Syria in the aftermath of the some 54 years of Assad family rule. Now, Jolani also announced that efforts are underway to disarm and disband opposition forces across the country and have their fighters actually join a national army. As we continue the discussion around this topic, we're joined now from Spain by Syrian reporter Badr Khan Ahmad. Thanks for being with us. I want to start on looking at what's gone down in Syria now, the scope of the horrendous atrocities that are being exposed throughout Syria. Notorious prisons unlocked, records seized. In one case, over 100,000 bodies in a mass grave. We're talking incinerators, pulverizers found for disposing the unknown masses of the executed. Numbers are still coming in, but it's hard to find any modern precedent, I think, comparable for this level of crimes against humanity. Are we seeing something truly baffling emerging here in the realities of what was taking place under Assad?
Of course, the situation was so hard, specifically after we have seen this footage and reports from these prisons. And today we have received some news that some NGOs announced that there are any hiding cells in Sednaya prison or any cells that could be in secret positions. But the question is here that where are all of these missing people? For example, in each province in Syria or in each governorate have a big number of people are still missing from the north, from Damascus, from different places. Still, parents publishing the pictures, the informations, the names of their children that they're still missing. And after we have seen that most of the prisons, or we can say all of the prisons, have been opened in Syria, unless have some prisons, or except have some prisons in the north of Syria, specifically more in the northwest. Before was under the control of HTS in Idlib, and also have some prisons also in the some SNA groups which is backed by Turkey. And regarding the information that we have got, that there is a location that could be around 100,000 bodies there. I have spoke with some residents who live in Al-Qatifa area, which is a town in Damascus countryside, is around 40 kilometers in the countryside. They have told me that's right. There is a location that no one had the dare to get close to that, and the Syrian government was trying to move the bodies from the prisons to this location. But what is not clear is the number of the bodies they have there.
I understand that the current numbers are really considered conservative, very low estimates. I want to get your thoughts on another aspect of the story emerging here, that al-Shara, this leader in Syria now, is calling for the Syrian Democratic Forces, among others, to surrender their weapons, join the national effort. How is this effort going to disarm, to disband the militias? Is it working? Are there other clashes? What do we know taking place across Syria?
Well, it's the situation in Syria was so much complicated before al-Assad. Now we can say it's more clear, but at the same time it's complicated too. Now we can say that have two main forces in Syria. One, which is the Syrian Democratic Forces, that it's backed by the US, that their main goal was to protect the minorities in northeastern Syria, specifically the Kurds. And the second goal was to fight against the terrorism, and which was the goal since 2014-15. SDF has fought against ISIS and other radical groups in many different locations in the northeastern Syria. Kobane, Hasake, Raqqa was the capital of the Caliphate of ISIS. So we have seen a statement from Pentagon that they will continue this rule with SDF. So that means that the SDF will continue their job in the northeastern Syria territory to fight against terrorism. But the question is, besides HTS or this new government, there are some other groups that is not under the control of HTS, which is, as I mentioned, the Syrian National Army. This Syrian National Army is an umbrella for many factions that backed by Turkey. These groups are more or less moving according to Turkish instructions in the north Syria, and they have done some attacks against the Kurdish territories in the north Syria. So Ahmad al-Shara or Jolani, he has mentioned more or less, not in the formal way, to ask for join the new army. And SDF, they have no problem with joining, but they need first to do a political change.
Sure, big tall task, and you touch on some of the topics we'll discuss further in the show here. Thanks for joining us for now, Barakan Ahmad.
Thank you.
With the collapse of Syrian President Bashar Assad's regime, it did leave a major power vacuum and appears set to reignite the conflict between Syrian Kurds and Turkey, as we just talked about here, with its proxy Islamist factions now taking really de facto control. And the issue is leading U.S. officials to raise the alarm as ceasefire talks surrounding the mostly U.S. allied Kurds have reportedly collapsed. Here's more.
Coming shortly after Syrian President Bashar Assad's regime fell to rebel group HTS in early December, senior U.S. officials are now cautioning that Turkey seems to be preparing to launch a large-scale military offensive into Kurdish-held territory in Syria, citing an alarming buildup of forces along the border. Antony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of State, made an urgent visit to Ankara to meet with the Turkish president and seek assurance that Turkey would limit operations against Kurdish fighters. But after U.S.-brokered ceasefire talks between Syrian Kurds and Turkish-backed rebels collapsed Monday without agreement, Turkish military commandos, artillery units, and allied militia fighters were seen in significant numbers near the Kurdish-majority city of Kobani in northern Syria, a move that is reminiscent of Turkey's 2019 invasion of the northeastern part of Syria. At a news conference on Monday, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump suggested that neighboring Turkey was quietly behind the fall of Assad.
Well, nobody knows what the final outcome is going to be in the region. Nobody knows who really the final. I believe it's Turkey, and I think Turkey is very smart. He's a very smart guy, and he's very tough. But Turkey did an unfriendly takeover.
A senior official in the Kurdish civilian government in Syria, Ilham Ahmed, wrote to President-elect Donald Trump in reaction to the worsening situation, requesting him to put pressure on the Turkish president to abandon the operation. Meanwhile, U.S. officials also stressed that a fresh Turkish offensive would exacerbate regional stability and jeopardize security measures against remnants of the Islamic State.
We know that what happens inside of Syria can have powerful consequences well beyond its borders, from mass displacement to terrorism. And we know that we can't underestimate the challenges of this moment and in the weeks and months ahead.
Now for more, we're joined by Dr. Sinan Sidi. He's a senior fellow on Turkey for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good to have you with us here. Credible reports indicate that Turkey is preparing to invade the Syrian territory held by Kurdish forces. Again, viewing the Kurdish armed groups there and the SDF as an extension of their outlawed PKK, the group that's really spearheaded decades-long insurgencies against Turkey. What do you expect to see next?
Well, as your report accurately suggested, I think there is a lot of consternation, a considerable amount of worry about whether the Turkish armed forces will actually move into northern Syria to actually take on and engage the SDF forces located in Kobani, which I have to say is hugely symbolic for our Kurdish partners or U.S. Kurdish partners and simply because they will not essentially, in my estimation, just take that standing and they will fight against the Turks. And as a report also accurately suggests, that presents a stability problem simply because a major NATO military will now be engaged in a major military conflict inside of Syria. We also don't know what the actual response of the HTS, which is in Damascus right now, specifically Jolani's response to such a Turkish military attack will be, because his messages have also been mixed too, in terms of whether he's willing to accommodate a Kurdish presence politically inside of Syria's future, or whether he's willing to allow the Turks to essentially to sort of determine the Syrian Kurdish fate. But either way, we're looking at a considerable amount of instability simply because of the military buildup. And if history is anything to go by, when Turkey mounts military sort of assets on its border with Syria, it likely intends to do something with them militarily. So we're not just seeing showmanship, in my estimation.
Look, Turkey, and Stan, the Turkish intentions here, what we think they're up to. Look, they really are the one power from the 2018 accords that essentially divided up Syria, along with Russia and Iran. It appears now in a stronger position versus Russia and Iran, who are much weaker. How are they set to leverage that? Are they likely intent on turning Syria into that type of Turkish vassal?
I mean, that's a really good question. Look, I agree with the notion that Turkey is right now, at least it's in a more sort of strengthened position as far as calling the shots. Erdogan is overestimating his position, I think, simply by declaring that, both Iran and Moscow have been weakened, right? They look embarrassed that he's willing to push forward with sort of determining the political future of Syria without necessarily their input. But that does not mean that he will get to able to essentially sustain that or maintain what he wants. What will that conflict with the Kurds look like if it becomes protracted? Yeah. How willing is the Turkish military and the Turkish public ready to take casualties? How tested is the Turkish military in a long military campaign against a robust tested force that's been involved in counterterrorism operations against ISIS for a while, who are motivated to maintain their homeland, as we have seen in Russia's war against Ukraine? What will be the response of HTS right now in Damascus? What will be the response of regional countries such as Israel, such as the United States? We don't know. Will Iran and will Moscow, just because they're assumed to be weakened by Erdogan's estimation, literally allow Erdogan to walk over and essentially land grab and determine a political future further? I don't know. But here's what we can say, and this, I think, is critical. If Erdogan essentially was interested in gaining security guarantees from the SDF, from the PYD, right, that such that they should not be a threat to Turkey because of their historical ties and roots in PKK, then all he has to do is call up Salih Muslim, the leader of the PYD and the political organization of the Kurds in Syria, and just talk to him, right? It's not something that they could not knock out within 1 hour. It's not something that Erdogan personally believes in, that is, Kurds presenting a security threat to Turkey. Right? These Syrian Kurds are not interested in attacking Turkey. They're not interested in presenting a terrorism threat to Turkey. They're interested in survival inside of Syria. Erdogan is doing this because he wants to look strong. He wants to show his domestic audiences inside of Turkey that he's taking a tough counterterrorism stance when there actually isn't one.
Right. Well, certainly a lot to play out here. Appreciate your analysis here, Dr. Sidi. Now, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, they've launched a series of crackdowns against armed groups in Jenin this week, resulting in some rare open clashes and casualties. Now, this attempt to reassert their authority in these cities is drawing attention, as many of the emergent and independent armed Palestinian factions growing in the territory are thought to have ties or even open allegiance to Iran. And Tehran has worked extensively to smuggle weapons and cash into these groups in the hope of, well, inflaming another volatile front for both the Palestinian Authority and Israel, as it turns out. Again, in the studio here with Dan Perry, and now joined by our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. Ariel, coming to you first. I mean, does the PA, Palestinian Authority now, it appears that they're trying to take back some semblance of control, at least in this part of Jenin. Do they have a chance? And on top of that, what do we know about the Iranian inroads in these areas?
Look, so we've seen these efforts by the PA security forces to try and reassert their authority, their sovereignty in these parts of the northern West Bank. They haven't succeeded until now. And in essence, Israel operating in these areas is because the Palestinian Authority fails to do so. Now we're seeing this latest attempt by the PA. It does seem a more serious attempt, you could say, at least publicly, optics-wise. at the end of the day, we have to remember that any attempts to draw out a post-war Gaza, on the American side, they said they wanted to see if the PA were to be involved, it would have to see a reformed Palestinian Authority to get rid of the corruption and all the internal challenges that are going on there.
Yet to see that, I should add.
Yet to see that, and what we could be seeing is President Abbas's attempt to say, hey, we don't need reforms, we can do it ourselves, here, look. Okay. And so that's one. The other is also, as the PA is hoping to get more involved again in administering post-war Gaza, it needs to get its security apparatus back up and running. And so that is what it's doing now, because it does have the understanding that its actions in these areas against terror entities, various terror groups, it doesn't only protect Israel. That is the criticism, that they're wasting or endangering Palestinian lives in order to secure Israelis. They understand that it's also securing their ability to assert their authority, to regain some semblance of sovereignty in these areas. Obviously, this is accepted with a lot of happiness by Israel, but time will tell the test of continuity, consistency. There's still some time until we can see that they're actually making up for that test.
Dan, bringing you to this, and on the Iranian angle, are they the menace that we are led to believe they are, reported are, and trying to stir up trouble in the West Bank as well?
I think we know that the Iran and Hamas had hoped that, among the multi-pronged war they're declaring on Israel, the West Bank would erupt in a new intifada, and that largely hasn't happened. It largely hasn't happened because of Israel's counterterrorism, but also I think we have to be fair, the PA as well. And I agree with Ariel. I mean, this positions this action in Jenin is partly to position the PA in the conversation about post-war Gaza as being the authority that can reasonably return to Gaza, from which they were expelled by Hamas in 2007. Is Israel happy about this? I mean, a reasonable Israeli would be happy if that could emerge as a thing to do with Gaza. Better than leaving Hamas in Gaza, and better, in my view, than permanent Israeli occupation on the ground, including taking care of the civilians in Gaza. But the government of Israel has been engaged in an all-out demonization of the PA because they need to prevent that scenario, which I deem reasonable, from emerging as the dominant one. And so they've been sending all their spokespeople to this and other studios claiming that the PA is as bad as Hamas, which is pretty much as preposterous a claim as I've ever heard from a government. So I have to think Israel's a little bit dualistic. Do they want the PA to emerge as fantastically effective in the West Bank?
Yet to be seen. Look, on the West Bank, and specifically these Area A, parts of the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority-controlled areas, where we have seen, let's call it the lesser of all the fronts on Israel this year. Is there a model of success there to be followed in terms of the way the IDF operates on a daily, nightly basis there, when we compare it to the policies that were in place in Lebanon or Gaza that turned out to be so disastrous?
I mean, Israel has no great options, and the situation in the West Bank is not ideal by any stretch of the imagination. It too much embroils Israel in accusations of apartheid because the Palestinians and Jews have different systems and they're so close together.
Complex.
It's not a great system, but on the other hand, diplomacy is the art of the possible, and the Middle East is the arena of the least bad option. And, Israel very reasonably fears a complete pullout would lead to Hezbollification of the West Bank. And an area that is fully controlled by the Palestinians ends up perhaps being controlled by a resurgent Hamas in the future. Right. And we saw on October 7th what that led to.
Popularity is high across the West Bank, really all Palestinian municipalities.
I think
Hamas is popular.
Perhaps the least bad option is for Israel's government to drop its nonsense and do what is needed to get the PA to be able to go back into the West Bank, into Gaza rather, and replicate in Gaza for a while what they're doing in the West Bank, where Israel does have the right to go into Deir al-Balah or Rafah or whatever when the PA is failing to control potential nests of terror. But let us hope that in the wake of the evisceration of Hamas, there are no such nests of terror. And maybe alongside the PA taking back Gaza, or maybe in some sort of consortium with help from the Arab world, whatever, they also reform themselves on the civilian side and emerge as the government in waiting of an independent Palestine.
Positive potential outcome. I'm going to add another layer to our discussion here, another aspect here. An Israeli negotiating team is in Doha for working level talks with Qatari mediators on what's termed the remaining issues in a potential Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal. Now, according to the latest reports, now these talks are focused on bridging gaps between Israel and Hamas pertaining to IDF presence in the Strip and which Palestinian security prisoners could be set free, potentially. Now, despite the intensive diplomacy of the Biden administration, the previous round of talks that was in mid-October failed, with Hamas rejecting any short-term ceasefire proposals. But to get more of a gauge of the issue in the Israeli public, we're going to our correspondent Joe Brown, who's out in Hostage Square, Tel Aviv now, at the epicenter of really the emotions and proactivity surrounding this. Look, Joe, Israelis clearly are following every development, every twist and turn in this saga, which has played out for a painful, surreal 438 days already. What do we know now?
Well, the Israeli public is overwhelmingly in support of a hostage deal as soon as possible, and that's being mirrored from what we're hearing here at Hostages Square. I spoke to a family member of one of the hostages. He didn't want to be on camera because of the sensitivity surrounding the deal, but he said that although he's optimistic, he's heard a lot from the media, but he hasn't heard anything from the government. And for him, he said it's just kind of a sense of deja vu. It wasn't long ago where he was told by the media and by politicians that this deal is closer than ever, and it never occurred. And he's hearing a lot of the same now. Israel Katz said that a deal is close. Hamas are reportedly willing to cut a deal now. And President-elect Donald Trump, said that all hell will break loose if a deal is not struck by the time he is inaugurated on January the 20th. He reiterated this yesterday, saying that he spoke to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And this seems to be the main catalyst for the reason why the deal is being accelerated so quickly. He wants a deal so that he doesn't have to deal with any sort of mess when he's in power. Hamas also wants a deal because they have had falling approval rates in the Gaza Strip over the last couple of months. It's gone down to around about 30 to 40% approval in the Gaza Strip. This is because the war has been dragging on for so long now. The humanitarian crisis has been continuing, and Israel is now wanting to push ahead for a deal. The final couple of details are being ironed out. There were reports that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is already in Cairo for talks. This was rubbished by the Prime Minister's office, but sources close to I24 News said that he will be arriving in Egypt potentially as soon as today, and they will likely iron out the final details, and hopefully for everybody here, after 14 months, we might finally see a deal that can bring maybe not all of the hostages, at least in the first phase, but at least a good portion of hostages back into Israel after so long held captive in the Gaza Strip.
Thanks, Joe. Coming to us again from Tel Aviv. Bringing in that point into the studio here. And Ariel, there's certainly rumors were swirling today about Prime Minister Netanyahu being in Cairo as he headed to Cairo. What does this mean? Egypt is inviting President Abbas, I think we know, to Cairo or to some talks now. Egypt now playing a central role, or have they always been playing a central role in what might emerge from the conflict in Gaza?
Well, actually, I think since Doha, since the Qataris took a side role in the mediation, Egypt took that opportunity to go into the forefront.
Is this a competition, really, between Egypt and Qatar over this issue, to be the broker, to be the arbiter, or more of they each have influence?
They're both central partners, but each one is vying for to appeal to the American administration. Obviously, everyone wants free access to the White House, to the Oval Office, and if you're considered the mediator who brought the deal, then obviously you score more points in the current and I assume the following administration. But if we're looking at what is going on right now, Egypt has really used this time to bring forward a proposal that is considered to be the most viable one right now, but it also is dependent on a post-war committee joint between Hamas and Fatah to administer the Gaza Strip. And it is believed that this is the mechanism that would enable Israeli leaders to sell it to the public, because Prime Minister Netanyahu, since the beginning of the war, said he does not Abbas, not Hamas. Abbas, that would be Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. So with this administrative committee of technocrats, it would be Hamas and Fatah once removed, and that is considered to be something that can be sold to the Israeli public. This meeting tomorrow, or Abbas's visit to Cairo, coincides with the summit of the 8 developing countries, the D8, as opposed to the G8. The D8 includes countries like Pakistan, Iran, and their likes. So President Sisi of Egypt wants to urge President Abbas to approve, to green light this committee, but so far he has not given his approval, and in the absence of his approval there won't be this committee, and this committee is believed to be the mechanism that will enable this whole deal to move forward. So there are still some sticking points according to Hamas, but this is, at least on the Palestinian Authority side, what their involvement in all this.
Look, Dan, I've been critical of Egypt, really from the onset of this war, and whether it be their what appears to be complicity in the arming of Hamas across the border, their virtual caging Palestinians into Gaza throughout the war, no one allowed out, not even women and children. What's your thoughts on how they may now emerge as the central arbiter of a potential ceasefire, of some form of resolution right now to the conflict?
I don't think it'll change the essence that they don't want Gaza to become their problem, so they're never going to allow Palestinians in large numbers to enter Egypt. But they do want to, be seen as a major player, maybe the major player in the Arab world, in the Muslim Arab world, which they had been all these years. And there's a sense that that's been supplanted by Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states in particular. So, of course, there is some jockeying in that regard. And Ariel mentioned some competition between Qatar and Egypt as to who will get the credit. I think, interestingly, we'll also see competition between Biden and Trump about who will get the credit. And, I suspect all 4 will seize credit and let them, because Israel clearly needs to find some elegant solution to the impossible situation they've put themselves in, where Hamas insists on an end to the war and Israel insists no Hamas, but then Israel also is nixing all the alternatives to Hamas. And Netanyahu is blamed for using this as an edifice to prolong the war for his political reasons. It's such a mess. If they need to invent some fictitious committee in order to pretend like that's what's running Gaza and give them a face-saving way out, well, as I said before, let them.
Thank you, Ariel Osman, for being with us. Dan, stay with us. We got some more topics to throw your way, but to stay on the topic here, the family of 20-year-old U.S.-Israeli hostage, Eden Alexander, revealed just how, quote-unquote, tough it was for them watching the Hamas-released video of Eden. Now, this was the first time that his parents had seen any information or any sign of life since he'd been taken. Take a look.
So I've been in Tel Aviv, Israel, when the video released. I saw it with my family. It was the first time that I'm seeing my child after 421 days. It was the first time that I'm hearing him. And I look at the video again and again and again. It was very tough, every time that he breaks, it was real emotion, he was crying, he was by himself. I wish I could hold him and just to tell him everything will be okay, done. But I couldn't, and then I spoke with Adi, and we decided it's important to release this video for everyone to see this kid, 20-year-old US citizen, begging for his life, speaking to the Israeli people, speaking to Benjamin Netanyahu, addressing Donald Trump. And it was crucial for everyone to see, look, he's still in captivity, he's begging for his life, and he's still alive. You need to make the deal and you need to move fast, Winter is coming and it's such a tough condition over there. People don't realize they are not in apartments, they're like down beneath the ground in tunnels, no sunlight, no air, no water, not a clean water to drink, not hygienes, nothing.
The president-elect saw this video with his wife, and it was very important for him to see this video and for us to show him this video.
This is his room, and we have this Torah here that was brought by our local synagogue. The rabbis came in and blessed the room, and over here we just have all of his things and baby pictures and his high school diploma and little symbols of good luck and just things that we want him to have when he comes back.
For people, it looks like a number. For us, every day is a surviving mode for all the hostages to our Idan. Like, it's tough.
Just to tell him we hear your message. You ask us to be strong, so we stay strong. And you keep strong there and survive, and you will be out soon.
Yes.
Testament there, of course, again, all of Israel staying tuned to this topic, and we'll keep you updated on anything that emerges around it. But we do move on here as sirens blared across central Israel yesterday, sending millions of Israelis to shelter as fresh missile and drone attacks came from the Houthis in Yemen. And while the Houthis celebrate victory in their words, the Israeli military has other plans. Now, at 24 News, Alfie Moore has the latest.
The American forces have carried out an airstrike against a Houthi command and control facility that was used to coordinate attacks in the Red Sea, actions continuing to disrupt international trade. The airstrike comes after sirens alarmed in central Israel, reviving a scenario that had become less likely since the ceasefire deal between Israel and Lebanon-based Hezbollah. The missile came from Yemen and caused no injuries or damage.
The missile force carried out a military operation targeting a military target of the Israeli enemy in the occupied area of Jaffa, using a hypersonic ballistic missile, type Palestine II. The operation successfully achieved its objectives by grace of Allah.
Despite the Houthis claiming their mission was a success, the Israeli military confirmed the hypersonic missile was shot down before crossing into Israel on Monday afternoon. The Houthis reiterated the reason for their continued attack being their support for Hamas in Gaza.
The Yemeni armed forces continue to carry out military operations and strike all targets belonging to the Israeli enemy in the occupied territories, and these operations will not stop until the aggression against Gaza is halted and the blockade lifted.
With Iran's axis of resistance being weakened by the war between Israel and Hezbollah, and even further by the rebel takeover in Syria, Iran remains determined to continue their aggression against Israel.
With the actions taken in Syria and the atrocities committed by the Zionist regime in the U.S., as well as the support they are receiving from others, they thought the resistance had ended. They are heavily mistaken.
So, with Hamas severely weakened and Hezbollah cut off from Iran by the Syrian rebel takeover, are the Houthis Iran's last capable action against Israel?
And we're joined in the studio still by Dan Perry, international affairs analyst. And on the topic of the Houthis, Dan, look, they've continued their attacks as other fronts in this war have quieted or collapsed. The U.S. made some welcoming offensive effort in the last couple of days, not sure how effective, but this group is still disrupting Red Sea shipping. They're still attacking Israel, seemingly at will. Is this the next arena of offensive effort by Israel? And on the U.S. side here, is President Trump incoming now? Is he the geopolitical disruptor already that affecting this situation? Do we expect to see more from him?
I think so, as indeed he has clearly disrupted Iran and Lebanon and Syria, every other front also. Look, about the Houthis, they're criminals, okay? Yemen has a per capita income of around $600. Israel is almost 100 times more. The Houthis, the war the Houthis have imposed upon, not Lebanon, Yemen. The war the Houthis have imposed upon Yemen has killed almost 500,000 people, most by disease, but also in fighting. Instead of doing their best to bring this nation back on its feet, they're spending many millions, firing sophisticated hypersonic ballistic missiles at Israel that can crush them. It's madness. I don't know if they're directly taking their orders from Iran. We just saw the Iranians celebrating their big success. But I do know that it's in the nature of ridiculous things that they eventually come to an end. Now, the world has been a little bit reluctant about schooling the Houthis the way they need to be because, well, we know they're fanatics. We know that Iran is pulling the strings to a degree. They're tough to get to because they have dispersed their missile launchers all over the place.
Mountainous and rural place that they...
Yeah, it wouldn't be easy. I mean, I think we need to be a little bit humble And remember that the Saudis were fighting the Houthis for like 7-8 years and failed to dislodge them, despite the U.S. assistance that they received. That said, though, these miscreants are badly impeding global maritime trade. They've caused Egypt to lose billions of dollars in revenue from the Suez Canal, which Egypt can ill afford. And there will come a point where they'll need to be attacked very seriously. And it is, you know, a strike against the Biden administration that this has been tolerated. I mean,
the U.S.
Biden's foreign policy
playing whack-a-mole defense.
A little bit, but you know what? More could have been done.
Yes.
These half-hearted airstrikes that achieved less than Israel did in its one serious strike on the port of Hadassah.
Is that where you expect now a new Trump administration probably to take a different tack?
Or maybe Biden himself. Yeah. Biden still has a month or more. I would expect that a coalition arises, and hopefully it need not involve Israel, that puts an end to the madness represented by the Houthis, who sort of are the last man standing for the axis of resistance.
And again, as you mentioned, the region's poorest country. If this is what remains in the axis, perhaps things are headed in the right direction.
One thing that must be said is that the Houthis were actually, they had the chutzpah to actually be planning to invade Israel, or maybe even Jordan, or maybe Israel through Jordan, by deploying in Syria, along with the Shiite militias from Iraq and also Hezbollah for a time, and obviously Iranian operatives. And Bashar Assad didn't attack Israel directly, but he enabled this. Presumably, the new authorities in Syria are not going to allow the Houthis that avenue to attacking Israel or doing Iran's bidding against Israel, and so maybe this the rocket they fired was, you know, lashing out against the dying of the jihadi light.
We shall see. Dan Perry, as always, good to have you with us. Thanks for chiming in on all the topics we've gotten into.
Pleasure.
We do look at the Iranian regime now as they appear, for the first time in years, arguably, to be under immense pressure. It's manifesting in some obvious ways. For example, officials in Iran just announced widespread closures of schools, universities, government offices this week as Tehran struggles to curb energy consumption. It's all amid a worsening winter. Now, this energy crisis follows a summer of nationwide blackouts as Iran's electricity production and distribution systems, well, they failed. We're joined for much more on the subject by Jason Brodsky, now the policy director of United Against Nuclear Iran, joining us from Washington. Good to have you with us, Jason. Look, Iran's axis of resistance, as they term it, heavily invested in here. The apparent top priority of the regime now collapsed, okay, and leaning on a variety of militias in Iraq and the Houthi tribe in Yemen, again, the poorest country in the Middle East. It's a dramatic turnaround, obviously, from a year ago. How has this seemingly affected the regime in Tehran so far?
Well, it's great to be with you. I think the Iranian regime is confronting mounting crises abroad and also at home. It has never been weaker. And we see the Islamic Republic spending billions to prop up the Assad government in Syria. And then many Iranians are left asking, what did this achieve? How did this advance Iranian national interests? And the answer is it didn't. It advanced the interests of the Islamic Republic and the Islamic Revolution, but it turned into a galactic mistake and also a galactic error in judgment and mismanagement for the Islamic Republic to waste billions of dollars on propping up Assad's government, only to see it fall in the matter of over 10, 11 days.
Look, given the failures of their proxy system right now, the potency of this regime, at least in terms of its posturing towards Israel, greatly reduced. What options are left now for the regime? Are they going to race for the bomb?
Well, I think that you see a growing chorus of voices in the Islamic Republic's political establishment who are pushing for the advancements of its nuclear program and potentially a change in its nuclear doctrine. I think, though, the supreme leader will be careful, because it's not only that the axis of resistance is collapsing, it's also he has to worry about whether rushing for the bomb would meet a U.S. strike against his regime, which could basically imperil the Islamic Republic's existence itself. And at the end of the day, the preservation of the Islamic Republic is the most important variable for Ayatollah Khamenei in his strategic decision-making.
Along those lines, and to come back to this, the cutting of power, significant shortfalls all around the country. Look, Iran possesses some of the world's richest energy resources. They have the second largest natural gas reserves globally. among the top countries in oil reserves. Look, it seems that this chronic energy, shortage stems from years of underinvestment. And this is all while Hezbollah received billions of dollars. Is this playing out as a PR catastrophe for the regime at home?
Well, I think the Iranian people are very well aware of the fact that their government is incompetent, corrupt, and not advancing Iranian national interests. So that will come as no surprise, but it adds to the growing frustration of many Iranians towards the Islamic Republic, and it has led them to the conclusion that this regime is irredeemable and has to go. And I think that there is a very significant chance of protests to come in the weeks and months ahead, because the drivers underlying Iranians' dissatisfaction with the Islamic Republic have only gotten worse, not better, since the 2022 Masa Amini protests. So that's something to look ahead to.
Jason Brodsky, always eye-opening conversation with you. Thanks for joining us from Washington.
Thank you.
Now, separately, the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, is a staunch ally of Russia. He's on a multi-day working visit to the Sultanate of Oman. Now, with an apparent focus on energy infrastructure, economic exports from Belarus, Lukashenko's visit comes on the heels of a series of high-level bilateral meetings between the countries over the years recently, appearing to be centered on trade and economic cooperation. Now, the Sultan of Oman is also planning a visit to Belarus next year. Both sides speak openly, optimistically about the future trajectory of this somewhat geographically unlikely collaboration. For more on that subject and the dealings in the region here, we're joined by Professor Ariel Cohen, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, also in Washington. So thanks for being with us. Look, what underlies this alliance, if I call it that? Is it what it seems, a sensible economic partnership, or are there deeper geopolitical interests at play here?
Well, Lukashenko is a proxy for Putin. Russia and Belarus are a unified state. It's a unified country with a joint parliament. And for all intents and purposes, Belarus is a bridgehead of Russia into Europe. A lot of Belarusian companies are under sanctions. Lukashenko himself is under sanctions for a crackdown on opposition, for disappearing people, killing the opposition leaders. And he and Putin are trying to break out of this isolation. And they're going to the global south, including to a place like Oman. And I won't be too surprised that both Belarusian and Russian exports will go through Oman further. And to wit, he is visiting this free trade area that Oman is trying to develop in competition with UAE. So I would be watching very carefully what goes from Belarus, which is a major weapons exporter, to Oman, and then from there, where else is it going? Is it going to Iran? Is it going to Africa, etc.? So this is a deliberate effort by Russia and Belarus to develop. We saw their leadership in developing BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, etc., and to build an alternative to their ties in the West. But Lukashenko is known as the last European dictator, which he is.
Well, certainly, as you mentioned, Putin, the likely, it's called puppet master behind the scenes of this one. Look, I want to bring another angle into this. Oman has really intriguing, even you could argue unique ties around the Middle East, when it comes to Iran, even Israel. Is this also a point of interest in this conversation?
I don't think so. I think the big game in the Middle East now is first getting hostages out of Gaza, but of course, the game around Syria, getting the Russian military out of the Syrian bases. And by the way, if Lukashenko is gently prodding and asking the Omanis if what they would think about putting Russian Navy assets in Oman, I would be monitoring that very carefully.
Is that what we're seeing? And to sort of tie this into Syria, are the Russians really waging a quiet, full-scale retreat from their positions in Syria?
The Russians suffered an irreparable blow. They lost Bashar al-Assad as a major Middle Eastern ally. There are reports of some of the Russian naval vessels going to Libya, to the areas controlled by General Haftar, who, by the way, looks like Lukashenko. It's really funny. And the Russians are searching for alternative to Syria, which are not easy to find, be it Egypt, as before the Russians were kicked out of the Soviets, were kicked out of Egypt in 1972, or elsewhere.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, it's Russia's only warm water port in the world is in Syria there. So this would be a major asset to at least try to replace or maneuver around. Look, Professor Ariel Cohen, thank you for joining us from Washington.
My pleasure.
Now, that does bring us to the end of the program today here on Middle East Now. Again, thanks for joining us on I-24 News. I'm David Matlin, live in Tel Aviv. We'll see you again next time.
It started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
Today I'm really thankful.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Welcome to The Rundown on I-24 News. I'm Nicole Zedek. Thanks for joining us this evening. We are following all of the latest reports on rapid movement towards a hostage release deal and ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas sources told I-24 News tonight there has been significant progress on reaching a deal, but there are still 4 main sticking points, according to this source. 1, Israel is still demanding its forces remain in 5 security points throughout Gaza during the ceasefire. 2, Israel doesn't want to release 7 high-profile Palestinian security prisoners Hamas wants included in the deal. 3, debates on where the Palestinian prisoners will be released and how long until they can return home. And finally, 4, an internal Palestinian dispute with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas demanding the joint Fatah-Hamas committee to administer post-war Gaza will fall both politically and security-wise under the PA. Hamas is refusing this. Now, if a ceasefire is in the near future, Israel claims it will still have military control over Gaza, according to Defense Minister Israel Katz. He said even after the war, Israel will continue to have security control in the Strip, just like the IDF has in the West Bank. Troops in Gaza recently destroyed a tunnel in northern Gaza's Jabalia that was used by Hamas, an attack that killed 3 soldiers in October. The underground tunnel was 500 meters long and demolished by combat engineers. Meanwhile, 2 soldiers were killed in southern Gaza yesterday when a building in Rafah collapsed. Major in Reserves Moshiko Rosenwald and Sergeant First Class in Reserves Alexander Anasov were killed in the incident. 2 others were injured as well. Now, Israel is still operating inside the buffer zone with Syria and now moving past it, according to local media. Reports say IDF tanks entered the town of Saida, which is just past the edge of the buffer zone. Not only this, but Russia's Sputnik news agency says an Israeli helicopter landed in Damascus for about 20 minutes for troops to enter a Syrian military facility. While Israel hasn't commented on any of these reports, Israel's deputy foreign minister addressed the recent airstrikes in Syria, saying the goal right now is to make sure terror groups don't have access to highly sophisticated chemical weapons left behind by the Assad regime.
Our attempt and our actions within Syria mainly is to make sure that terrorist organizations don't have access to highly sophisticated weapons, ballistic missiles, including chemical weapons as well. I think that no one in this world, after seeing the images of the first Syrian war, in which Assad used the allegation that he used chemical weapons against families and children. Those images are still haunting many people around the world.
Prime Minister Netanyahu was on the Syrian side of Mount Hermon this afternoon, saying troops will remain in the buffer zone until another arrangement is found to ensure Israel's security.
I am here at the summit of Mount Hermon with the Minister of Defense, the Chief of Staff, the Northern Command Major General, the Shin Bet head, and senior commanders. We are here in a state of emergency to decide on Israel's deployment in this important place until another arrangement is found that guarantees Israel's security. This brings up nostalgia for me. I was here 53 years ago with my soldiers in a general staff patrol. The place has not changed. It is the same place. But its importance to Israel's security has only been reinforced in recent years, and especially in recent weeks with the dramatic events taking place here below us in Syria. We will determine the best arrangement that will guarantee our security.
Syrians are now demanding an Israeli withdrawal from this buffer zone as the fallout from the collapse of Assad's regime has thrown the Golan Heights into political turmoil. Our Alex Schloss reports.
A week after the fall of Syria's Assad regime and the IDF incursion into the demilitarized zone on the Syrian side of the border, dividing the Israeli-annexed Golan Heights from Syria proper, Syrians are pleading with their new government to secure an Israeli withdrawal from the area. Though Israel says its presence in the buffer zone is temporary, aimed at deterring armed factions from threatening Israeli communities. Villagers are concerned that the IDF's presence may become indefinite.
This is the border with Israel on the other side. The only reason we are here is to make sure that we are protecting our civilians on the other side of the border.
The IDF is in regular contact with Syrian Druze community leaders, and they have even cooperated with Israeli forces on efforts to collect abandoned Syrian army weaponry. Meanwhile, the Israeli government has approved plans to expand settlements in the Golan Heights. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that the move was necessary because a new front had opened on Israel's border with Syria following the fall of the Assad regime to an Islamist-led rebel alliance. The plan aims to double the population of the Golan Heights and has been met with harsh international criticism, citing the fact that the Golan region is considered occupied Syrian territory, with only the U.S. recognizing Israel's annexation of the region in 2019. The Golan Heights has been under Israeli control since the 1967 Six-Day War, during which Syria used the territory to shell Israeli villages.
And regarding this Israeli occupation, it is not surprising since Israel occupied Palestine and Sinai and occupied the Syrian Golan Heights and Lebanon, it is currently starting a new occupation. Behind us, you can see the digging which the Israeli army is doing, which is against all international charters.
Currently, there are around 30 Israeli villages in the Golan Heights, home to an estimated 20,000 Israelis. They live alongside some 20,000 Druze Arabs, most of whom do not possess Israeli citizenship and still consider themselves Syrian, though there is a disparity between the older and younger generations. This contrasts sharply with the Israeli Druze communities in northern Israel, who are citizens of Israel and the only Arab community conscripted into the IDF.
The collapse of President Assad's regime has left a power vacuum, as well as reignited conflict between the Syrian Kurds and Turkish-backed rebels. U.S. officials are raising alarm over the military buildup near Kurdish-held areas as ceasefire talks collapse. Here's more.
Coming shortly after Syrian President Bashar Assad's regime fell to rebel group HTS in early December, senior U.S. officials are now cautioning that Turkey seems to be preparing to launch a large-scale military offensive into Kurdish-held territory in Syria, citing an alarming buildup of forces along the border. Antony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of State, made an urgent visit to Ankara to meet with the Turkish president and seek assurance that Turkey would limit operations against Kurdish fighters. But after U.S.-brokered ceasefire talks between Syrian Kurds and Turkish-backed rebels collapsed Monday without agreement, Turkish military commandos, artillery units, and allied militia fighters were seen in significant numbers near the Kurdish-majority city of Kobani in northern Syria, a move that is reminiscent of Turkey's 2019 invasion of the northeastern part of Syria. At a news conference on Monday, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump suggested that neighboring Turkey was quietly behind the fall of Assad.
Well, nobody knows what the final outcome is going to be in the region. You know, nobody knows who really the final. I believe it's Turkey, and I think Turkey is very smart. He's a very smart guy, and he's very tough. But Turkey did an unfriendly takeover.
A senior official in the Kurdish civilian government in Syria, Ilham Ahmed, wrote to President-elect Donald Trump in reaction to the worsening situation, requesting him to put pressure on the Turkish president to abandon the operation. Meanwhile, U.S. officials also stressed that a fresh Turkish offensive would exacerbate regional stability and jeopardize security measures against remnants of the Islamic State.
We know that what happens inside of Syria can have powerful consequences well beyond its borders, from mass displacement to terrorism. And we know that we can't underestimate the challenges of this moment and in the weeks and months ahead.
There are reports this evening on airstrikes in the city of Hadassah in Yemen. Not many details at this time, and no one's claimed responsibility. But overnight, the United States did carry out fresh attacks against the Houthi rebels in Yemen, as the Iranian-backed proxy continues disrupting international trade routes throughout the Red Sea. The U.S. action comes shortly after the Houthis fired a ballistic missile at central Israel yesterday, causing millions of Israelis to run to shelter. Our Alfie Moore has the details.
The American forces have carried out an airstrike against a Houthi command and control facility that was used to coordinate attacks in the Red Sea, actions continuing to disrupt international trade. The airstrike comes after sirens alarmed in central Israel, reviving a scenario that had become less likely since the ceasefire deal between Israel and Lebanon-based Hezbollah. The missile came from Yemen and caused no injuries or damage.
The missile force carried out a military operation targeting a military target of the Israeli enemy in the occupied area of Jaffa, using a hypersonic ballistic missile, type Palestine II. The operation successfully achieved its objectives by grace of Allah.
Despite the Houthis claiming their mission was a success, the Israeli military confirmed the hypersonic missile was shot down before crossing into Israel on Monday afternoon. The Houthis reiterated the reason for their continued attack being their support for Hamas in Gaza.
The Yemeni armed forces continue to carry out military operations and strike all targets belonging to the Israeli enemy in the occupied territories, and these operations will not stop until the aggression against Gaza is halted and the blockade lifted.
With Iran's axis of resistance being weakened by the war between Israel and Hezbollah, and even further by the rebel takeover in Syria, Iran remains determined to continue their aggression against Israel.
With the actions taken in Syria and the atrocities committed by the Zionist regime in the U.S., as well as the support they are receiving from others, they thought the resistance had ended. They are heavily mistaken.
So, with Hamas severely weakened and Hezbollah cut off from Iran by the Syrian rebel takeover, are the Houthis Iran's last capable action against Israel?
In yet another Iranian foiled operation, the Israeli Shin Bet security agency and police arrested an Israeli man from Jerusalem. 23-year-old Ardil Israel Amoyel. He was allegedly spying for Iran and planning a terror attack. He was in contact with Iranian intelligence via social media. First in contact with a profile using the handle Ariana, and later transferred to John, who became his handler. The Shin Bet says Amoyel was also working to recruit others to help spy for Iran, especially people with criminal backgrounds. And the Palestinian Authority is finally doing its job, cracking down on terror cells in the West Bank. But Hamas is now accusing the PA of committing a grave crime with these ongoing counterterrorism operations in Jenin. Here's what the spokesperson for the PA security forces had to say.
The Palestinian security services are operating according to a clear political vision, a vision and instructions from the Palestinian leadership, headed by His Excellency the President, on the importance of imposing order, establishing the rule of law, restoring civil peace and societal security, and granting the Palestinian citizen a normal life, while at the same time thwarting all these plans that target the Palestinian National Project and the Palestinian cause by targeting, undermining, and weakening the Palestinian National Authority.
And now let's take a deeper look at some of those top stories. Amid these swirling reports today on the whereabouts of Prime Minister Netanyahu, his office confirms he is not in Cairo, despite rumors he had traveled to Egypt to push hostage negotiations. But Egyptian security sources reportedly say even though Netanyahu isn't there, a meeting is underway to work through remaining points on a deal. And tonight could be decisive in setting the next steps. So where do negotiations stand at this point? For the latest, let's go live now to our I-24 News correspondent, Joe Brown, who joins us from Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. Joe, there are so many different reports right now, but what do we know about where negotiations actually stand?
Well, right here, right now in Hostages Square, as it is every Tuesday, there is an event called Singing for Their Return. This is a mixture of songs and prayers dedicated to the 100 hostages who remain captive in the Gaza Strip, as well as speeches from family members of some of the hostages. Today, there is going to be talks from the mother of Naama Levy and also the mother of Yonatan Samarano, who was killed on October the 7th, and his body was taken into Gaza by an UNRWA worker. But the general feeling here now is that it's a case of when and not if. I spoke to a family member of one of the hostages earlier. He did not want to be filmed for this because of the sensitivity surrounding the deal. But he said that although he's heard in the media, not from the Israeli government, but in the media, that a hostage deal is closer than ever, this is a sense of deja vu for him. He heard about this quite a couple of times over the last 14 months, that a deal is going to happen soon, and in that case nothing happened. But this time it does seem to be a bit different, and this all stems from the comments from Donald Trump a couple of weeks ago that if there is no hostage deal by the time he is inaugurated on January the 20th, then all hell will break loose. He reiterated this statement last night after a conversation with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but this has spurred on all different sides to try and get a deal done. Hamas now wants a deal done because of the plummeting approval ratings in the Gaza Strip. They are now around about 30 to 40%, a considerable drop from the very high numbers that we saw following October the 7th. Israel wants a deal. They want to bring home the hostages as soon as possible. There's been so much internal pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as pressure from the US. And Joe Biden also wants a deal done so that he can have somewhat of a legacy, that he was able to mediate some kind of deal that brought back some of the hostages. But as you mentioned, there's some conflicting reports about how far the deal is done. But as of yet, nothing has been signed. There still seems to be a couple of I's that need to be dotted and a couple of T's that need to be crossed. But according to all sides, the Israeli side, the Hamas side, and the American side, we are now closer than ever to a deal to bring back the 100 hostages who remain in the Gaza Strip as they have been for the past 14 months.
Well, let's certainly hope it's a matter of when and not if, as you said. Joe Brown with that update from Tel Aviv at Hostages Square. Thanks so much for the latest. Now, for more, we are joined in studio by military and strategic affairs analyst Yaakov Lapin, the host of the Lapin Assessment on Patreon, as well as our I-24 News Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us this evening. Yaakov, I want to begin with you because just as our correspondent Joe Brown said after speaking to some of even the family members, the Israeli citizens, the amount of times that even you have been in this studio at I-24 News, and we have talked about the progress on a deal. Is this another example of negotiations possibly being blown out of proportions, or are we actually getting closer this time?
There are signs that this time is different. There have been very few leaks, unlike past times. I think that's a good thing. Leaks only harm these negotiations. So everybody is keeping their cards close to their chest. But what we seem to be able to ascertain as of now is that Hamas appears to have dropped its demands for an Israeli military withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in exchange for what would likely be a partial deal. So that means that the IDF is going to remain in Gaza. It might redeploy, it might change its positions, but it's not withdrawing, at least according to the reports that we've seen. And if that's true, that's a major gain for Israel. And I think that the reason that Hamas would soften its position is not because of approval ratings. I think that Hamas could care less about approval ratings. They rule by the force of their guns and arms, but because they fear that the IDF is going to be able to bring more forces from Lebanon back down to Gaza and increase the pressure on them. And we heard yesterday that the 98th Division, which has been fighting in Lebanon, is moving now south to Gaza. The 98th Division caused major damage to Hamas. They know exactly what it can do to them if it comes back. I don't think they want that pressure. They want to press the pause button. I think that's the major motivator as far as they're concerned. And I think there are reasons to believe that this time things look different and that a deal does look pretty imminent.
So it seems right now we're focusing on the sticking points, which a Hamas source told I-24 News. Some of those sticking points, Ariel, one that is very interesting to me is the high-level Palestinian security prisoners. We're talking about terrorists who, many of them committed violent, deadly attacks on Israeli civilians. If they are to be released, where would they be released to? Would it be the West Bank? Would it be Gaza? Could it even perhaps be abroad? What are the options on the table?
That is exactly what is being discussed, and Israel, for its part, does not want to see them return to the West Bank and in the immediate future. We're talking about high senior terrorists who have been managing this Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror apparatus for years before they were arrested, and also often from within the confines of the Israeli jails. And so Israel does not want to see them return to their homes, unlike what we saw in the previous round, or the previous ceasefire agreement that saw the release of Palestinian women, of teenagers who were involved in terror activity. They were released to their homes. That is not going to be the case now. There are concerns also among the Palestinians, among Hamas, that in previous deals to release prisoners, for instance, back in the early 2000s, that they were told that within 2 years they can return to the West Bank, and they still haven't been able to do that. So there are a lot of moving pieces here, but this is indeed one of the main sticking points. But if we're looking at trying to gauge where the situation is right now, some of the reporting is really that a deal is imminent. And so in terms of potential timeline, I think interesting, Qatar al-Arabi al-Jadid. Qatar is where these negotiations are taking place. They're reporting that both the Hamas and Israeli delegation are expected to arrive in Doha in the next 2 days to, quote, complete discussions on the agreement. And so this would coincide with an expected timeline that some have been throwing around, potentially before Hanukkah, the Jewish holiday.
Which begins just next week.
Yes, and so I do agree with Yaakov. The sense is that this time is different. Not all the points have been agreed upon between the sides, so it is still too soon to celebrate, but the atmosphere, at least from all the sides, is that there is indeed a significant breakthrough in the talks.
Well, let's talk about another one of these sticking points that we reported on, and it coincides with the action that we're now seeing from the Palestinian Authority security forces inside the West Bank. Hamas condemning that action. But what we were hearing before was the Palestinian Authority, President Mahmoud Abbas, backed by Egyptian forces as well, forming this technocratic government between Fatah and Hamas. But the PA wants to see this under their jurisdiction, truly. And so how could this internal Palestinian dialogue possibly impact the future, the quote-unquote day after in Gaza?
I don't think it will, because I think Israel has made the decision that it's not going to give up security control of Gaza for years to come. But I think the PA is kind of trying to prove to the incoming Trump administration that it can take control of areas that it has lost. Primarily, we're talking about the northern West Bank, Jenin, places like Tubas, and partly Nablus as well. These are places that terrorists have taken over. And the IDF is the one that's been going in and day out and taking care of this threat before it becomes another terrorist killing machine, sending attackers into Israel proper. So what we're seeing now is the PA trying to fill in the void that it has failed to fill for years. And their success has been partial, and they definitely are making an effort now. But it seems that they're trying to reestablish their credentials as a regime that can rule and control territory and not lose it to Hamas, as they've lost the northern West Bank, as they lost the whole of Gaza in 2007. Their track record isn't great.
So is it too little too late then?
I think, when you look at it, from a bottom line perspective, without Israel, without the IDF, the PA would have been basically taken over. Ramallah would have been overrun by Hamas years ago. It's really the IDF and the power of the Israeli military and the Israeli intelligence that has kept the West Bank from fully exploding, and which has actually ironically kept the PA in power in Ramallah. And so this is, an effort. It's not a bad thing that they're doing it. It's a good thing. It's long overdue, but we have to judge this thing by its results and put it in its proper context. Without the IDF's daily massive counterterrorism raids throughout the West Bank, I don't think the PA would even be with us today.
Ariel, your thoughts?
Yeah, we've seen this PA activity before, trying to reassert show that they're trying to reassert their authority over these areas. They have not led to any real change on the ground. I agree that this does appear to be one of the most robust efforts that we have seen in recent years. And I just want to hop on to what Yaakov said. Not only is the PA trying to show that they are capable of playing ball, but one of the conditions for allowing the Palestinian Authority to administer post-war Gaza this is from the White House, were to see significant reforms in the Palestinian Authority. So this could be an attempt by the current Palestinian leadership to perhaps avoid that avenue, saying we can get the job done even without these reforms, that who knows what that would do to the current leadership of the PA moving forward. So they're trying to say here, with what we have now, it is enough. Just give us that chance and we'll do it. But obviously, this is just the beginning, one in a long chain of these operations by the PA, albeit one of the more robust we have seen, but still they have a lot more to prove moving forward.
PA President Mahmoud Abbas is set to travel to Egypt tomorrow. I know it's not the official reason for his trip amid all of these rumors and reports that we are having all this progress towards a hostage release deal, but what is the timing of this trip to Egypt then?
Well, it looks like the Egyptians, have their own agenda, which is they are trying to convince the Americans and Israel to give the PA a role in post-war Gaza. And I think, the real question is, what would that role be? Would they have some sort of symbolic presence on, say, the Rafah border crossing? Whatever the role is, I think the bottom line is that Israel, from its perspective, and it is going to have the final word on what happens in Gaza from a security perspective, they are not going to outsource, Israel is not going to outsource core security functions to anybody, not to the PA, not to any international force. All of these suggestions have been tried in the past in various forms, and they've all failed miserably, and the cost has been catastrophic. So I think Israel is going to reserve its right to have the basic operational freedom to move into any area of Gaza and to control the borders of Gaza with Egypt, to make sure that Hamas doesn't start resupplying itself. And whether the PA can, have some sort of symbolic role in that configuration is up for discussion. I think the Egyptians will try to push for that, and they will try to lobby the Americans for that to happen, and Israel will push back, and we'll see how that unfolds. But I think these are the basic things that are up for discussion right now.
There's a lot more to be seen into exactly the coming hours, it seems, as we might get some more details into exactly how these talks are moving forward. Gentlemen, stay with us. We do have to go out for a quick break here on The Rundown. But when we come back, we're going to talk about all of the latest developments on Israel's northern front and what's happening inside the Israel-Syrian buffer zone, where Prime Minister Netanyahu was there earlier today. We'll bring you the latest right here when we return.
Started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
Today I'm really thankful.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Welcome back to the Rundown on I-24 News. Prime Minister Netanyahu visited the Syrian side of Mount Hermon today to review the IDF's preparations in the field and set the rules for the next stage with Syria, according to a statement from his office. Well, let's go live now to the Golan Heights, where our I-24 News correspondent Emmanuel Onora joins us from right now. Emmanuel, what should we make of Netanyahu's visit? And what more can you tell us just about Israel's moves thus far inside the buffer zone with Syria?
Right. Well, Netanyahu's visit really is a reassertion of the Israeli positions with the IDF since the fall of Bashar al-Assad, and Netanyahu saying clearly that the IDF will remain in the buffer zone in its positions until another arrangement has been found. Now, that really leaves a lot of questions. And meanwhile, the new Syrian leader, al-Jolani, did say himself that Israel does need to leave these positions, that the new Syrian government does intend to stay committed to the 1974 ceasefire deal with Israel. But al-Jolani also interestingly said that Syria will not be used as a launch pad to attack Israel and doesn't want war with Israel among other countries as well. But this really comes as a break with the previous administration in Syria with the Bashar al-Assad regime, which had a very close alliance with Hezbollah. And as we know, Hezbollah often attacking Israel from Lebanon, but also from Syria. So this really is quite an interesting development. And in the meantime, on the Syrian side, al-Jolani has also been progressing on the diplomatic front, meeting with various international delegations from France, Germany, and the British, and all of them basically wanting assurances of any transitional developments regarding this new administration. France specifically requesting that this new administration does, in fact, still fight what is left of ISIS in Syria. But also earlier today, there were reports of the IDF moving beyond the buffer zone, which is where they have been posting themselves over the course of the last 9 days since the fall of Assad, and in fact quite south of the Golan Heights and closer to the border with Jordan. So there is still some IDF movement. Of course, that is unconfirmed reports at this stage, but definitely something to keep monitoring.
Certainly, Emmanuel Onora with that live report from the Golan Heights. Thanks for the update. Well, still with me in studio now, Yaakov Lapin, host of the Lapin Assessment on Patreon, our I-24 News Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran, as well as joining us now, Dr. Hai Eitan Kohan Yanarojak, an expert on Turkey at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University.
Thank you for having me.
Gentlemen, thanks for being with us. I want to begin, Yaakov, this movement that we're hearing inside the Israeli-Syrian buffer zone is going to last, it seems like, coming from all of Israel's leaderships. But what we heard from the HTS leader now criticizing this military activity inside the Golan Heights, they say that Syria is committed to the 1974 agreement. And so are we likely to possibly see some clashes coming out of this Israeli presence in the area?
Well, I think it depends with who. I think HTS is going to be very busy in the near-term future trying to stabilize Syria, trying to create basically a new political framework from scratch. It's got the Kurds to deal with, it's got the Russians, it's got the Iranians. And I think, from a kinetic military perspective, the last thing they want is at this time, is a military confrontation with the regional power, the strongest regional power in the area. But, it's also, it would be interesting to get their take on the Turkish military occupation of northern Syria, past and present. The Turkish interference in Syria, that seems to pass off without any problem from their perspective. So there are a lot of question marks there about Turkey's role. Look, at the end of the day, I think what Israel is doing is applying lessons from the 7th of October. And those lessons basically teach us that we are not able to guess the intentions, the long-term intentions of various actors on the other sides of borders in this region, whether it's Hamas, whether it's a whole range of Islamist and non-Islamist factions in Syria. There are dozens of groups out there. So even if HTS doesn't plan to do anything, violent in the coming days, who knows what other factions are planning? So Israel is taking no chances, and it's removing capabilities, it's taking them off the table and placing the IDF in forward positions in order to boost the buffer zone and the ability to push back any potential threat. Now, I think that at the end of the day, if Syria is able to gather, its pieces together and reform, not reform as in change, but actually reconstruct itself as a peace-seeking state, and it's able to commit itself to the 1974 disengagement agreement that was reached between Israel and the old Syria on the buffer zone, then I think Israel will pull its forces back. But until it can see that happening, and it's probably going to take a very long time before we're there, if at all, I think Israel is going to be playing it safe.
Well, a big part of this big puzzle piece inside Syria is certainly Turkey, and the movement that we've seen from Turkey, despite all of the international condemnation we've seen on Israel side, there's been a lack of it when it comes to Turkey. Now the United States starting to be wary of Turkey moving in on the Kurdish forces in the northern part of the country. And so, Dr. Hay, what exactly are we seeing with Turkey, and what is their goal right now as well?
Okay. The most important Turkish objective is to push back the Kurdish presence on the Turkish-Syrian border. In Turkish eyes, the existence of PYD-YPG is an existential threat for the Turkish national security, because in their eyes, if in case that there will be a Kurdish autonomy that will later pave the way for a Kurdish independence, it may disintegrate Turkey, and not only Turkey, also the other countries in the region, like Syria, like Iraq, like Iran. So in their opinion, they must act against any kind of Kurdish aspirations for a future Kurdish independence. So that's very complex. And therefore, in their opinion, since they have the upper hand in Syria, they would like to seize the opportunity. I would also like to remind you that the Turkish occupation in Syria began not only last week, but since 2016, they penetrated into Syria with 3 different military operations. They are controlling the Jarablus canton, the Afrin canton, the Tel El Abyad canton, and now when we are looking at the map, now they are trying to merge the cantons that they are disengaged, meaning that the Kobani canton that we are seeing is located just at the middle between the Tel El Abyad and the Jarablus canton. So they would like to have a geographical contiguity throughout the border.
A buffer zone?
A buffer zone, let me say like a 30-kilometer depth buffer zone. And another most likely target will be a town called Ain Isa, which is the exact junction of a very important highway there in northern Syria. In case that the Turks will be able to acquire the control in that particular town, they will be able to cut the geographical contiguity between Kamishlo, which is located in northern eastern Syria, and the Kobani area. So these 2 locations are super important, and in my opinion, Turks will try to maximize their interests prior to the arrival of Donald Trump.
Well, and speaking of the United States, we are getting an update from the U.S. In regards to a possible ceasefire extension. Ariel, what details do we have?
Yeah, based on the U.S. State Department, the ceasefire between Turkey and the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, has been extended to the end of the week, but this doesn't apply to all Kurdish forces. We're seeing images coming out of northern Syria of Turkish Bayraktar drones attacking YPG installments, killing people on Syrian territory, not something that I heard a result of any Israeli airstrikes, even though that is the global outrage of Israel's targeting of hundreds of military sites across Syria. Israel managed to do that without targeting any civilians or military personnel. That is not the case on the Turkish side, but as far as the SDF and Turkey, that appears to be more stable. As for other Kurdish forces, Turkey is continuously engaging them on the ground and from the air.
Turkey is certainly an interesting development when it is happening in Syria, but it does seem like it has been a long time coming. Dr. Eitan Kohan-Yanarojak, thank you for giving us your insight into Turkey as always. Now we're going to move on to Paraguay, as the president of Paraguay was in Israel for the inauguration of its new embassy in Jerusalem, becoming one of 6 countries to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Our I-24 News Spanish anchor, Nicole Michel, she sat down with President Santiago Peña to talk about his vision for the future of Israel relations.
Maite, President, welcome to Israel. Thank you very much.
This is how we also say hi in Out-Sweet language, the Guarani. It is a pleasure, Nicole, to speak to you once again.
Thank you very much. This whole trip has been exciting and intense, only 48 hours. You visited the main spots in Israel with the presence of most of the main Israeli political figures, and they were all very emotional from your speech in the Knesset. What motivates all of this energy that you brought from Paraguay to Jerusalem?
What motivates me is a people of over 6 million people in Paraguay who have a centuries-old consolidated faith in a process of discovery and construction of a society that had to face adversity, like a terrible war that was the War of the Triple Alliance, a war of extermination lived by Paraguay and had to rebuild Paraguay, rebuild its lands. We know the pain that is represented to a nation. So throughout the last few years, Paraguay has demonstrated a huge closeness that for some, it's hard to understand, even more to those who do not know history. But Paraguay was a decisive vote in the creation of the State of Israel. Paraguay was one of the countries that followed the measures taken by the United States in 2017 to open an embassy in Jerusalem. We opened it in 2018. Unfortunately, internal political differences made the embassy be returned again to Herzliya. But when I went out campaigning, when I listened to the Paraguayan people in rural areas, in the cities, all of them asked me, be close to Israel, be close to Israel. So, in reality, this is the request and sentiments of a nation, a whole people to which we, the rulers, are messengers. I bring the message of Paraguay, a land that admires the Jewish people and Israel, and in these difficult moments, we want you to feel accompanied, that you don't feel alone.
Many times the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said, my good friend Santiago Peña. To see the Prime Minister have this reaction in a country under a very complex situation of war, what did he share with you? What message did he convey?
I had the opportunity to meet him for the first time when he did his first visit to South America. He was in Argentina in 2017. It was a really historical visit. We already had taken the decision to move the embassy. Then I had the opportunity to meet him without a role, because in my first meeting I was the Ministry of the Economy and him Prime Minister. But when I visited Israel 3 years ago, he was a Knesset member and I was a civilian dreaming about the possibility of becoming President of the Republic. And I believe we are both passionate about public service and history. He is a great connoisseur of history, and I am passionate about the history of Latin America and Paraguay in particular. So in this meeting, we could reflect about the challenges that our generation faces. What are we fighting for? How different were the fights of past generations? And the truth is, I believe we are both convinced that this is a fight worth fighting for, that it doesn't matter how hard it is, this is the correct way. For me, it is very important as a young person, form a country that desperately needs to advance, progress, develop, but we know that this development cannot come at any price because along the way, someone will have to pay this price. So I believe it is a very important experience beyond the leadership of the Prime Minister or the President or the Speaker of the Knesset. For us, this is the message for the people of Israel. You are not alone. We had the opportunity to speak to many survivors of the October 7th attacks, with parents of boys who went to the war and did not manage to return. And I believe all these testimonials are felt very close to us. For a country that also lived a war of extermination, of intolerance, that we unfortunately didn't want to exist. But as human beings, we are fighting it. We have to fight it.
As you have mentioned, Israel is facing a war against terror, Iran and its proxies. One of them, Hezbollah, has a significant presence in Latin America, in Paraguay, at the Triple Frontier. What intelligence deals between Paraguay and Israel are being crafted to combat this?
Our visit clearly also looks to strengthen a bilateral agenda We already had a relation, but we want to take it to a totally different field. Way more ambitious in the economic field. We believe Paraguay has much to offer to Israeli companies. We believe that on the security field, Paraguay has much to work on, and Israel has to pay more attention to South America. We are collaborating, but there is still much more to be done. I believe that the two main plagues are the organized crime and drug trafficking. Paraguay is not a main producer or consumer of drugs, but it is in the center of South America. We are an important logistical center, and this attracts these criminal activities, which we are fighting against decisively. We have also put forward the possibility to engage in a wider collaboration and cooperation agenda in the fields of defense and security, as well as in the economic field.
Now, I wanted you to say something in Guarani, like, I love you, Israel.
Israel. Te quiero, Israel. We will value these couple days here. It has been amazing. We brought a very broad delegation of different sectors of Paraguayan society, and we took everything with a huge affection and caring, and with desire to return at once. A few months ago, we said, this year in Jerusalem, today we want to invite all Israelis to come to Paraguay in the next year.
Now, Israel is reportedly planning a significant response to the repeated Houthi attacks. Just yesterday, the Houthis in Yemen fired a ballistic missile toward Israel, causing millions of people in the center of the country to run to shelter. The missile was shot down by Israel's air defense system before entering our borders. But this is just one aspect of the Houthi attacks. Something they're far more successful in is the monthly attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea, causing major disruptions in the global supply chain. So the question is, coming back in studio, why is it falling on Israel right now? And do we expect Israel, Yaakov, to actually have some sort of a strong response to Yemen? Clearly, it is causing some damage in Israel, but minor compared to the damage that the Houthis are causing around the world.
Absolutely. I think this has been one of the stains, actually, on American foreign policy and generally the world. You know, when you challenge an international waterway, when you terrorize maritime civilian ships, you are challenging the whole global order in the civilized world. And the response has just been minimal. We did see in the past 24 hours a U.S. CENTCOM strike on a Houthi command and control center in Sana'a.
And reports also of a strike in Hadassah, possibly U.S. behind that as well, but little details at this time.
Right. But, you know, when you match these strikes up with the U.S.'s actual firepower, this is a drop in the bucket. And it does fall to Israel, like, you know, so many other things in this region, to police the region and to eliminate the capabilities of Iranian-backed actors. And, you know, we've always said that the Iranians are happy to fight into the last Gaza and the last Lebanese, and it appears that they're happy to fight into the last Houthi as well, because this is really putting the Houthis in the crosshairs of the Israeli defense establishment. The Israeli Air Force is more than available now that the Lebanese front has gone quiet. Obviously, there are still patrols there, but, you know, it's a shadow of what it was in terms of Israeli air activity. And, you know, Gaza is at a much lower intensity rate. So the Israeli Air Force is very available. There are lots of planes that are available for this mission. And I believe that they will be heading south to Yemen probably sooner rather than later, because there's no way that these Houthis can fire ballistic missiles at central Israel and just have nothing happen. Now, we have seen, you know, major strikes in the past on the port of Hudaydah, but now I think that, you know, there might be an opportunity to target the leadership of the Houthis. I think that's what should happen. I don't know whether it will, but if there's an operational and intelligence opportunity to do that, I think that's what should happen, because really nobody else is putting the Houthis in their place. So, as usual, it falls to Israel to do the so-called dirty job.
And it won't only put them in their place, but Ariel, could this also be a time that Israel is truly reshaping the region? Because we've seen it in Lebanon, we've seen it in Syria, we've seen it in Gaza, we're seeing it in the West Bank. Are we going to see it in Yemen as well, all as Israel keeps its eye on the head of the octopus, Iran?
Well, the Houthis remain the strongest, or now have emerged as the last.
Which no one would have thought that in the beginning of the war, might I add.
Yeah, but they are the most driven to the cause. You have to give them that in all their videos and promotions. They are the most driven to the proxy cause of Iran. They have emerged as the last standing proxy in terms of their prominence. They want to, and they don't seem to be hesitating from assuming that role. We have, in addition to all of Yaakov's great analysis. Also, Iraq has said that it doesn't want to be a part of this. It does not want to be a launch pad. So the Houthis, as long as Iran continues to be engaged in its proxy doctrine, the Houthis are pretty much what's left. And so they're not shying away from this goal. I will say that it's not enough for Israel to get involved. It's not enough for the United States to get involved. I spoke a while back with the former Houthi spokesperson. He said a drastic problem requires drastic measures, and that comes in the like of regional coalition, Israel, United States, and Arab countries together. That is the formation that can get the job done. We are not quite there yet, or not. There's still a long ways to go to establish such a coalition. But in terms of how deeply entrenched the Houthis are in Yemen, taking over the entire country, that's what it would take in order to remove that threat, not only from Israel, not only from Red Sea maritime activity, but from the moderate world.
We have to see all of the Arab and the Western partners coming together with most of the problems, it seems, in the Middle East. Ariel Osseran and Yaakov Lapin, thank you for giving us your insight on all of the developments happening in the region right now.
Sure.
Now, in Abu Dhabi, the World Policy Conference was held over the weekend and bringing together some 60 international political and economic leaders, many of them notably from Israel and the Arab world. Now, it was an opportunity to take stock of the Middle East at a time of increasing uncertainty for the entire region. Our I-24 News correspondent Bastien Boré reports.
1 week after the fall of Bashar al-Assad, the balance of power in the Middle East is no longer what it used to be, starting with the ideological balance in a region where the breakthrough of a certain Islamism once shunned now seems inevitable.
Nous sommes en train, me semble-t-il, de vivre.
It seems to me that we are going through the ultimate phase of the global replacement of Arab nationalism, of which someone like Nasser was perhaps the best-known representative. Replacement by what? By these Islamist regimes, which are an ideology that doesn't precisely come from Western countries, unlike nationalism and socialism as they were interpreted at the time, but which comes from the region itself.
Interprété à l'époque, mais qui vient de la région elle-même.
This new situation has taken the Gulf monarchies by surprise. Minister of State at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the UAE, Noura Al-Kaabi, expresses Abu Dhabi's concern about the weakening of Iran and Israeli ambitions in Syria.
The Israeli-Iranian relationship is obviously going to be affected by this because Syria was a very important Iranian proxy. It's a pathway to Lebanon. It is now closed, and I think the Iranians are at a point in which they have to reconsider a policy in which they invested a lot of money and a lot of effort for more than a decade.
But Damascus does not overshadow Gaza, where post-war plans are multiplying, starting with a project for a major economic corridor between East and West via Israel and the Palestinian territories, which has already won the political and financial support of the Gulf states.
We see the opportunity of the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor as a means to build Israeli-Palestinian peace in the framework of an economic engine that corridor represents, to see interconnections that bring Palestinians, Israelis and Jordanians at center stage of this economic corridor.
Neighboring the Gaza Strip, Egypt is now hosting almost 100,000 additional Palestinian refugees whom the Egyptian economy is struggling to integrate. Cairo, which at the same time depends on its good relations with Israel, is faced with a dilemma.
Anything that changes the geopolitical landscape near our border is unacceptable. First point I'd like to make is, one example of that, is if you forcefully displace Palestinians across the border. That's not only illegal, it also creates a security problem, not because they themselves are secure, but because you're forcing people across a sovereign border illegally. Secondly, Gaza, after the Shamir decision back in the 2000s, was empty from Israeli troops. They still had outer control of the perimeters and the entry points in many different ways. But allowing the Israeli forces to remain in Gaza means you are acknowledging or re-accepting almost de jure, I mean, de facto definitely, but almost de jure, that occupation can occur, that there's justification for occupation, and it's something that we will never accept.
But all this is without counting the unknown factor in the equation, Donald Trump, who was very active in the Middle East during his first term and whose future actions none of the political leaders interviewed at this conference can predict.
Now, those are all of the top stories we have for you on this evening edition of The Rundown. Our main headline right now continues to be the progress, all swirling around a hostage release deal and ceasefire inside Gaza. It's day 438, and for 438 days, 100 hostages have been held captive in the Gaza Strip. There is reports that a deal is closer than ever, but most of those details are still under wraps, which could actually be good sign that they are in progress. As we do find out the latest details, you can always head to i24news.tv for more updates on whatever's happening right here in the Middle East. For now, I'm Nicole Zedek. Thanks so much for watching this edition of The Rundown.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Join us every week where we focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest here in Israel and throughout the diaspora, the global Jewish community. And we start with our top 5 items in the Jewish world, presented by Nicole Zedek. Hi, Nicole.
Thanks, Emily. Here are the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Trials are underway for some of the suspects in the anti-Semitic attack last month on Maccabi Tel Aviv fans in Amsterdam. New details are emerging about how the attacks took place. Prosecutors released WhatsApp messages of attackers saying they were looking for a, quote, Jew hunt in the Dutch capital, suggesting this was a premeditated attack and not a response to anti-Arab chanting from Israeli fans. Sweden's government is launching a project to chart the different types of racism in society and assess the level of Swedes' intolerance towards minorities. Sweden's equalities minister said there has been an increase in attacks against Swedish Jews, particularly in schools, where several times swastikas have been drawn on students' lockers. A German court has ruled that an 84-year-old woman and her son must vacate their home and return it to the descendants of a Jewish family forced out in 1939. The house in Wandlitz, about 15 miles north of Berlin, was initially bought by Alice Donat and Helena Lindenbaum in 1932, before the Nazis forced them to sell it for a small price to the ancestors of the current residents. Well, the court made its initial ruling in 2015, but after a decade-long legal battle, the court ruled in favor of Donat and Lindenbaum's descendants. The founder of global fashion chain Mango, Isaac Andique, has died at the age of 71 after an accident while hiking in Spain. According to Spanish media, he fell into a ravine while on a hiking trail in Montserrat. Born in Turkey to a Jewish family, Andique immigrated to Spain in 1969, where he co-founded Mango in Barcelona with his brother, Naaman Andique. And the New York Yankees have agreed to a whopping 7-year deal with Jewish pitcher Max Fried, worth a reported $218 million. Fried spent 7 years with the Atlanta Braves and became a 2-time All-Star in 2022 and 2024, and is now the 4th highest paid pitcher in Major League Baseball. Now, those are all of the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Emily.
With more than a year of sheer terror for Jewish students and professors on university campuses in the wake of the October 7th massacre, some universities are beginning to take action. The University of Michigan administrator Rachel Dawson was fired over alleged anti-Semitic comments. She's an administrator with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office and is accused of saying, quote, "We don't work with Jews. They're wealthy and privileged and take care of themselves," and that Jewish people have no genetic DNA that would connect them to the land of Israel. Dawson says she plans to take legal action, claiming the university violated her constitutional rights as a public employee. Joining us now with more is I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, who is in Washington. Mike, tell us what more you could tell us about this incident and also an incident involving very extreme vandalism for one of the regents of the university.
Yeah, very trying times up there in Ann Arbor right now. So Rachel Dawson, the head, or was the head of the Michigan Office of Academic Multicultural Initiatives within the larger Office of DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Now, Dawson attended an academic conference in Philadelphia some time ago, and she was approached by 2 Jewish professors there who found out she was attending and wanted to ask her questions about the anti-Semitism that was going on, very prevalent, well documented on the University of Michigan's campus, and that's when she allegedly made those comments. Now, Dawson's lawyer is saying that she didn't in fact make those comments, and the one about Jewish people having no connection to the land of Israel was instead a comment about, well, there are many ethnic groups or multiple ethnic groups that have a connection to that particular land, but she's denying the other comments were made. A complaint was filed by one of those Jewish professors with the Anti-Defamation League in Michigan, which determined that all things considered, the weight of the evidence said that she did in fact make those comments, and apparently that's what the University of Michigan felt as well. So they fired her. It's part of a larger issue surrounding DEI, not just at Michigan, but on campuses across the nation. The University of Michigan Regents, the board that oversees the university, has been talking about maybe defunding DEI. It's become, kind of a progressive bastion, politically motivated in some ways, and certainly has done so to the exclusion of Jews. Many DEI administrators say, we have the oppressed and we have the oppressors. The Jews are on that side being the oppressors. And there you have it, which has led to so many problems on campuses nationwide, which takes us to the regents themselves. The regents are elected officials in Michigan who oversee state universities, and one of them, Jordan Acker, a regent at the University of Michigan, is Jewish, and he has had his property vandalized now 3 times in what police are saying may amount to hate crimes. The most recent incident took place last week at his home. He had his windows broken and his car spray painted with divest, of course, an allusion to divesting from Israel, and the words Free Palestine, along with the upside down red triangle that has come to be known as a symbol of Hamas targets. Now, it's again the 3rd time now that Acker's property has been vandalized during the course of the Israel-Hamas war. Acker wants more action to be taken by the University of Michigan, which, at least to their credit on this incident, did staunchly denounce what they perceive to be an anti-Semitic attack against Jordan Acker. Again, just major problems right now, not just at Michigan, but again, across the country. We hoped it would kind of cease or at least die down during the summer break. That hasn't happened to any extent, Emily.
Okay, also, and part of what they threw into the house was a bottle of urine, if we want to also, mention that. Just a horrific behavior. President-elect Trump has been quite vocal. He was at an Israel-American Council event a few months ago pledging to take measures to combat anti-Semitism on campuses, saying it's very important for U.S. Jews to have equal protection under the law, and they're going to get it. So what do we expect him to do about it should things flare up once he takes office?
Well, it's interesting, and they've already obviously, flared up, Emily. It's to what extent they're going to take action now. And it's interesting with the Trump administration because the nominees have said constantly, we're going to take action. There's no doubt about it. But also the Trump administration and their nominees and allies have said, we got to dismantle the Department of Education. The Department of Education runs those investigations of anti-Semitism on campus. We spoke to Kenneth Marcus. He's the head of the Brandeis Center and created the structure when he worked at the Department of Education to investigate incidents of anti-Semitism and other hate crimes. And we asked him, well, what happens here if the Department of Education is in fact defunded or dismantled by the Trump administration to some extent? Where can college students go to voice their complaints about anti-Semitism? Here was his answer in a recent discussion we had with Kenneth Marcus.
It's 20 years ago that under the George W. Bush administration, I developed the doctrinal structures under which Jewish student civil rights are protected by the Education and Justice Department. And that has withstood the test of time now for 20 years over different administrations in different parties. It's not going anywhere. Assuming that President Trump is able, with the support of Congress, to dismantle the Department of Education, that doesn't mean that this work will cease, although it does mean that it will be taken under a different address. There may be fewer administrative cases of a lesser degree of significance that are pursued, but that those that are pursued are done with much greater vigor. Department of Justice cases and investigations have a power to bring in far more resources and greater accountability. So we don't yet know what a closure of the department would look like, and we don't expect it's going to happen overnight, but there's no reason to assume that it will lead to weaker as opposed to stronger enforcement in the cases that we care about.
I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, thank you very much. Changing gears, a new Netflix film about Mary, Mother of Jesus, is causing controversy over the casting of 21-year-old Israeli actress Noah Cohen as Mary and Israeli actor Ido Taco as Joseph. We know from biblical accounts that Mary, Joseph, and Jesus were Israelites, but now critics are calling for a boycott of the film, claiming Mary was a Palestinian. Take a look at part of the trailer. Us now by Zoom is Chen Mazig, a senior fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute. He is now in Washington attending a Hanukkah lighting candle event at the White House. Welcome and thank you for being here, Chen.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
So you are definitely a real activist that has been taken to social media to really correct wrongs in terms of narratives and history, with critics now calling for a boycott of this film, insisting she was a Palestinian. Explain why that can't be the case.
You know, I keep being surprised that I have to fight for Jesus' identity. I never imagined myself being in this position. And I'm sure many Jews share this feeling of why do we have to fight for Jesus' identity? Jesus was a Jew. You know, in Luke 2:21, Jesus was circumcised.
I think it's safe to say, you know, the Jewish people have been technically kind of whitewashed out of history with the portrayals, obviously over years, and now a portrayal claiming the Palestinian identity. Explain why historically it's not a factor. There was no such thing back then.
Right. I mean, Jesus wasn't a Palestinian because Palestine was named that after the Romans conquered Israel, and the Emperor Hadrian renamed this land to punish the Jews and to completely remove any sovereignty from our homeland. So rewriting Jesus' identity is just rewriting Jewish history. That's why so many of them are doing it, and that's why a lot of us are upset, because we recognize that it's not about fighting for anyone's rights, but it's only to erase Jewish connection to this land. I don't understand why you can't support Palestinian rights and needs without reframing ancient Jewish history of this land. But it's something that we're seeing happening over and over again. So I don't think it's a minor or just a radical campaign. It's something that is very sophisticated and aimed at people that don't know any better, and make sure that their whole worldview, this anti-Israel worldview, would stay intact while they're doing this.
Obviously, screen legend Sir Anthony Hopkins didn't have an issue. He plays King Herod, and he has a history. Apparently, he grew up with Jewish families, was involved in their Shabbat home things, turning on lights and whatnot.
Yeah, it's quite interesting time that we're living in when people are so uncomfortable with admitting historical facts, and I mean, it's fascinating that people from different generations didn't have to face these issues, and we could speak about history. We can say that Israel is doing things that are wrong and criticize Israel, but these days, I think it's very hard for people to have a conversation about historical facts and about the Jewish connection to this land of Israel. In the earlier report that you interviewed, that the reporter was saying that Adi and I, a facilitator in Colombia, was fired because she said that she doesn't think Jews have any DNA connection to the land of Israel. Truth and fact really don't care about what a facilitator in Colombia feels about Jews. The reality and history will always be the strongest case we have for why Jews have the right to live in Israel and why being anti-Israel is really anti-Semitic.
Thank you very much, as always, Chen Mazig, Senior Fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
As the Russia-Ukraine war wages on, millions of Ukrainians remain displaced in foreign countries. One of those countries taking in these refugees is Hungary, which is on the western border of Ukraine. And deep inside western Hungary is a refugee camp designed to house the thousands of Jews who had to flee their homeland. I-24 News correspondent Joe Brown visited this compound by Lake Balaton and witnessed a very special day for a very special couple.
The quiet, serene Hungarian countryside, thousands of miles away from a war that changed the lives of millions.
Начались военные действия.
Military actions began. We were very anxious about it.
Как происходило?
We were at home.
Мы были дома. Жили.
We stayed at home for about a month and then decided to leave.
И Потом решили уехать.
On February 24th, 2022, Russian tanks entered eastern Ukraine for what Moscow called a, quote, special military operation. With fears that the entire country could be taken over, millions of Ukrainians tried to flee their homeland. This includes thousands of Ukrainian Jews. Whilst many sought refuge in Israel, thousands fled into neighboring countries, such as Hungary.
I happen to know the chief rabbi of Ukraine, Rabbi Stamler, who is the head of the Jewish Federation of Ukraine. And on the day when the war broke out, on that morning, I called him up and I said, you know, we heard the terrible news, and if there's anything we can do, if we can give you a hand, if we can help you, we would like to help.
Rabbi Kovesh heard from his Ukrainian counterpart that hundreds of Jews in Dnipro, central Ukraine, were sleeping on the floors of synagogues, and asked if Kovesh's Association of Hungarian Jewish Communities, an offshoot of Chabad known as EMI, could do anything to help.
I called up my friends in the Hungarian government, and Minister Gulyás, who is the minister of the Prime Minister's office, he right away called me back and he said, yeah, we have a place.
That place is a small government-owned property in Balatonőrsöd in western Hungary, largely abandoned since an infamous speech by former Prime Minister Ferenc Gyurcsány from the site. Situated on Lake Balaton, this compound can host hundreds of Ukrainian Jews who left the country at the outbreak of the war. Around 4,000 people, including some Israelis who fled the North and Gaza border at the start of the war last year, have stayed in the camp since it was founded in spring 2022.
We have now around 150 people that live here day to day. Many of them are half families, just women with children, or either their husbands are still in Ukraine or they work in the city in Budapest. So the Ukrainian Jews became a part and parcel of the Hungarian Jewish community, and we are very happy for that.
One of those 150 people living here is Andrei, who fled Berdyansk in southeast Ukraine shortly after the start of the war. Andrei was not born Jewish, but his wife Daniela is. She fled Hungary with their son David shortly after the war started, with Andrei following soon after. After Chabad integrated Andrei into the Hungarian community, he opted for a decision that would change his life.
Когда я попал сюда,
When I got here to Balaton, there was a Jewish community. I immediately became part of it, and this gave me an even stronger push to undergo the process of conversion to Judaism. I started learning how everything works, attending prayers, participating with others in the prayers. I observed how people lived, how the Jewish people live, their traditions, their inner values, their feelings, and their actions. I really love our Jewish people because we are very kind.
потому что мы очень добрые.
Today is an important day for Andrei. Just a couple of weeks after his conversion was completed, he is now marrying Daniela in an Orthodox Jewish wedding in the presence of their family, including their newborn child Aviram, and their fellow Ukrainians living in Balaton. And despite the hardships of having to move to a new country in difficult conditions, Andrei is overwhelmed with the support and love he has received from the Jewish community and looks forwards to his new lease of life as a Jewish man.
Я очень счастлив.
I am very happy, and I hope that everyone around me is happy right now. This is more than happiness. I can't put it into words. It's amazing, simply extraordinary. I'm grateful to everyone who took part in this. Thank you all so much. I am immensely happy.
Few countries have a more complicated relationship with Jewish history than Spain, but now, more than 5 centuries after the expulsion of the Jews in 1492, a new museum is being built in Madrid that will highlight the immense contributions of Spanish Jewry from the Golden Age to the present, presented in a spirit of coexistence and harmony. I went to Madrid to film a TV special of Holy Land Uncovered, and here is a preview of the impressive Museo Hispano-Judía taking shape in a huge way.
Bienvenida. David!
How are you?
Finally, we Thank you. It's a
Wow.
real pleasure.
So this is the future of bringing back to life.
Hopefully, of establishing a new way of working between Christians and Jews in the Hispanic Jewish world. This is called the Museo Hispano-Judío. And it's in Spanish because Spanish language is really the element that gives a flow to this relationship for thousands of years.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, let's take a tour.
Let's do it. The building is owned by the Metro Company of Madrid. This used to be a building dedicated to monitoring all the substations, the electric substations of the Subway Company of Madrid. So besides the building, you have a system of tunnels that connect this building to all the metro infrastructure of the city. Wow. So this is a hall that we're going to dedicate as part of the permanent exhibition. It's going to be divided into two floors to show the history of Judaism and specifically also Hispanic Jewish ties and culture and why is it a special relationship. And we're going to show it from a perspective of showing the things that unite us. You know, there's obviously light and darkness in every story. We will talk about everything, but we will show that we have an opportunity in this moment in time to build something together. The ceiling is going to be increased, so you see already the structure there, plus another floor. So that's going to be a grand entrance. All of these, by the way, the columns go out. And if you come this way, this is the entrance, and I'm going to show you how you're going to really enter. So you're entering from the very first moment, and you're doing a journey that is sort of biblical, nice and warm. This structure is the home of the priest of the church that you see over there, the white one, which is the largest church of the area. The closeness between the Jewish and the Christian worlds is obvious. And what we're trying to do here is to look at things in a positive way, because Christianity has nothing to do with what it was 1,000 years ago. So all of this will be empty, no columns, and it's going to be a 400-seat auditorium with a connection to this that you will see right now that leads us into the other area. So you can see that it's open already.
Wow, this is really freaky.
By the way, this is where it's connected to the tunnels, literally.
Oh
So it's pretty scary looking. But think about the following. This can be a room where you walk in and you have all of this, with the different films that are happening. And it shows you, for example, the history of the Jews in Monterrey. Monterrey in Mexico, which is an incredible place. It was a city that was created by Jews. We're entering the area where we are going to have still part of our permanent collection, but mainly now we're entering into the temporary collections. So you can have, for example, we can bring 100 pieces of Chagall's paintings.
Wow.
And we can bring it here, and we have the whole collection that can run independently. We have 4 galleries. First gallery is dedicated to Judaism from Abraham Avinu to the Shoah. Second part is about Hispanic Jewish world with all its history. How Jews arrived here, how Jews lived here, when Jews left this place, how conversos had to leave for 5 centuries, and what happened to this Sephardic diaspora. The third gallery that we have is a gallery about Jewish values. So we're going to show in this gallery what things in common we have between the main monotheistic faiths. There's a fourth gallery that is very important to us, which tells you about Judaism today, modern Judaism. And there, what we show is the centrality of Israel. We get 85 million tourists in Spain every year. The statistics will probably hit 90 million. So that's, those are very big numbers. Everything is expanding also. The airport of Madrid is expanding. The city of Madrid has had also tourism growing on a 20-25% basis for the last 4 years. And we also believe that this is the moment where you need to talk about a few specific messages, where you celebrate diversity, but from your identity. It's not just, a soup where nobody is anything anymore. On the contrary, we are very strong about our identity, but we're very open in terms of sharing and including and so forth. But from the perspective